this is Ariane of Sociable Art, and today we're painting a beautiful Christmas poinsettia. And if you want to, you can use your own blank canvas and just sketch on the design, or you can purchase a paint at home kit, which will have a printed canvas sheet that will have the poinsettia in grayscale, so it's much easier to paint. And if you have a kit, it will come with the paint colors that you need, or you can just gather together white, red, green, black, I think that's it. Oh, and yellow. And what I'm doing here is I'm mixing my colors. I'm kind of making a little color study for myself, so I'll know which colors to use in my poinsettia. And so I've created a couple shades of the red or pinkish red that I want to have in the poinsettia. And either you can use a pre-bought, purchased pink paint, or you can create one mixing red and white. So I've created several different shades of red, and you can see here I've got a lighter pink, a deep pink, and then I even have a shade of red where I mixed some of my green with the red to create a really dark shade of red. So you can see that there, and then there's the darkest shade, which is black mixed with red. My green might be a little deeper than what might be in your kit. You can deepen the color of your green by adding some black to it, or even some red. You can just play around and see what kind of greens you can get. Here I'm making my color study for the green, and I just added white to the green that I have, and I got this kind of a minty shade of green. And here I'm creating a darker shade of green. I can add black to it. I can add a little red to it. You can even look up, if you want, some basic color mixing instructions anywhere on the internet to kind of get an idea of all the different shades you can make. Here I'm mixing some yellow with the green to get this brighter color of green too. And so, this is something, if you don't want to take the time to do it, you don't need to, but I found that my paintings seem to come out better if I really work on getting the colors and shades and values that I want to use in my painting, kind of mixing them in advance and having them ready to go. Okay, so now that I have the colors kind of figured out and pre-mixed, then I can start to paint the background of the canvas, and I'm going to do a nice green shade. Of course, you can use something else in the background of yours, and you want to use the biggest brush you can in any particular area. So I'm using, I think it's a number 4 filbert, and I've got white paint that I'm mixing with some of the deeper green color. And as you can see, as I'm filling in, I started out with a deeper shade of green, and then I dipped my paintbrush into the white and just started mixing that right on the canvas. I put some white right in there because I don't like my backgrounds to be one solid shade. I like to have kind of mottled, kind of light and dark areas in the background. So I'm just using this filbert brush to paint around the petals of the flower. And then as I get out towards the edges of the canvas, I try to use a kind of a more loose stroke. And I'm just sort of blending in that white that I added into the canvas with that deeper green. And see here that I'm using a darker shade of green on the outside of the canvas, on the edges, and I will blend that in a moment. But right now you can see me adding that green, darker green, and then I'm going to move towards the lighter area and then mix between the two. It's easy to mix two different shades of color if both are wet at the same time. So that's why you want to work like, you see I'm just in one area of the canvas here and blending together using kind of a cross-hatching back and forth stroke. And here you can see that I'm using a paper towel. This is just a technique I like to do. I take this paper towel and I just like to blot, and it removes excess paint, kind of smooths out brush strokes. I just kind of like the look that it gives. It almost makes it look like a watercolor. So you can try that if you like it. You can do it. One thing I would suggest is don't use a patterned paper towel, like anything with like flowers or dots, because you'll see that on the canvas, which is kind of interesting, but you might not want that. What I was about to say is some people feel like they want to outline around the entire flower first and then start filling in. And I caution against that because when you do that, that outline will dry prior to you getting around to filling in all around it. And once it dries, you will see it through the paint over painting that you do. So that's why I work in one section at a time so I can keep my paints wet as I blend them. And all around, I'll be doing this darker area in the background. And so if you'll just keep filling in that way, I'm just going to speed up the film in a moment so that, because really we're just going to basically be filling in the background, and you can pause it and fill in your background, and then we'll move on to the next step in a moment. Okay, you can see that I have finished filling in my background, and I actually went over it and did a second coat on some of the areas and lightened up the area right around my flower. And I just did that second coat to kind of make the background, the brush strokes a little smoother and make it look a little more finished. Definitely don't want any canvas showing through your paint. So just now I've just created my darkest shade of red by adding some black to my red, and I'm creating this really dark center because we want to have, first, it's a great focal point in the middle, and also later I'm going to put some little yellow dots on there, and I want them to stand out really well. So I put my darkest shade there in the center, and I blotted it a little, but that's not necessary. You want to keep it nice and dark. And then when we start working on these petals, it can be confusing to remember which are leaves and which are flower petals, so because they look very similar. So what I just did is I made a little mark of green on each of the 3 green leaves so that I wouldn't get confused and paint them in red. And I'm just adding a little bit of that dark shade while I still have it. I'm just going to add it in to some of these areas that are going to be the darkest areas on the canvas. And so this petal is underneath the other 2. And I would always suggest start with your petals that are underneath. Because if you start with the ones on top, it doesn't look as natural when you go and do the ones underneath them. So start with the things that are at the bottom. So these petals are the ones that are overlapped. So I'm filling in my darkest shade on these ones, and that's red mixed with a little bit of black. And I'm just using that same brush, or if you need to, maybe a slightly smaller brush to get into some of these areas. And remember, you have 2 different ways to use the brush. You can use the nice flat side of it, and then you can turn it and use the skinny edge of it, almost like it's a pencil. So I'm filling in, and I still do that little blotting technique with my paper towel, even when I'm doing these flower petals. And you can, as you're filling in, you can add different shades into that petal. So I've got one shade of the red mixed with the black, But I can also add some dabs of a slightly different shade of red on there just to give it a little interest. Here I am just blotting with my paper towel, and it gives it kind of an interesting texture. And then I'll fill in the other two in the same way and with the same type of shade. And you can even, after you finish blotting, you can run your brush along the petal in a line to give it the idea of the veins on the petal. So I could do a line right down the center, and then, you know. And here I am just darkening the center and darkening those areas again to make sure that they really do show up as dark. And here you can see me doing that line down the center of the petal. So I'm just going to do that same thing with each of these petals. Okay, now I'm going to start filling in the 3 green leaves. And to create the darkest shade of green, I can do green mixed with a little bit of black, or I also like doing green mixed with some red too. It makes it a little bit brownish, but I don't know, I kind of like the color that creates, the green with the red. So I'm just going to fill in these 3 green leaves, kind of in the same way that I did the red petals, with the filling it in and then blotting with the paper towel and then adding a little line or some lines for veins in the leaves. And as I said, you don't have to use just one shade of green. You can put several shades into there. Okay, you can see here I finished filling in the 3 petals and I put the lines on them. The 3 leaves. Put the lines for the veins in the leaves. And now I'm going to move on to the next set of flower petals. And so these, if you want them to stand out from the ones that we've already done, they obviously will need to be a different shade, especially in the area where the petals are overlapping. So this particular area that's right next to the other petal, you want to make sure you do that in a different shade. So I'm going to create this lighter shade of red, or really it's kind of a pink shade. It's red mixed with white. And I'm going to do that right next to that darker petal so that you can be sure to understand that it's a separate petal and they don't just look like one big mass of red. So the way that we create this contrast between the two is creating 2 different shades that will stand next to each other. Down here near the center, of course, this is going to get a little darker because it's a little shadowed down here. So to that pink shade, I can add just a teeny bit of black to it, or a little green, whichever you choose. And see, I have that darker shade and then I have that lighter shade. And to blend them both, I'm going to clean my brush and use this clean brush to blend between the 2 areas. You don't want to overdo it. If you start doing too many brush strokes, you're going to pull that dark shade right up into the light shade and just make the whole thing darker. So just concentrate on the area between the 2 to blend. And if this blotting technique, I don't do this in every painting, and if this is not for you, if you don't like that textured look, you definitely don't need to do it. It's just a matter of choice. I like that look, so that's why I chose to do it that way. You got to do it while it's still damp or you won't get that look. Okay, so that's one. And with each petal I do, I just have to make sure that the lines, the areas where they're touching, like right here, I have a petal right next to this other one. And this petal is underneath the other one, so I figure it will be darker because it's being shadowed a little bit here by this other petal, the lighter petal that's on top. So I can do a slightly deeper shade of red. It's still bright enough color that it will separate itself from that dark petal that it's next to. So I have created a color. This is why I did the color study, because I need to have, like at least 3 shades of red so that these petals will all be separate from each other. I really like this color of red. You'll find, if you're supplying your own paints or, whatever's included in your kit, there's so many different shades of red. And everybody sees red differently. And what might look like orange to some people actually looks like red to others. So that's kind of interesting. But this is, I think everybody sees this shade as a red or a deep pink. You can even use magenta. I don't know, most of, there are red poinsettias and then there are those kind of pink ones. So I've done something sort of in between the 2. So in a moment I'm going to speed up the film because we're going to do all the petals in the same fashion, and you can pause it to fill in yours or just watch along. Okay, now you can see I finished filling in all of the petals. So now it's time to just do any touch-up that you want to do. If there's any areas where I blotted off too much color, I can add a little more color back in. I might want to darken the center even more so it'll be ready for the little dots I'm adding. So that's what I'm doing here, is creating an even darker little center area, just dabbing in some of the dark shade for those little yellow dots to stand out on. darkening some of these areas. The highest contrast areas, the darkest area, I want to appear real dark so that that flower really will look three-dimensional and feel like it's popping out of the canvas. I'm just continuing to darken these areas. And this area had blotted off just a little too much of the paint color, so I'm adding some back in. Same thing here, it just got a little bit too light. Using my paper towel blotting technique so that the areas that I touched up don't look too different from what I had done before. Still darkening that center up just a little bit more. And before you go to put the yellow dots in the center, you're going to want to make sure this is nice and dry so you can get that really bright color. And if you're impatient and want to keep on painting, you can always have a blow dryer handy and kind of do a little blow drying on that canvas. The acrylic paint dries very quickly, but a blow dryer will make it even faster. Okay, here I'm using my green paint. And I like to use a medium brush with a square edge to do lines, but some people prefer a skinny little round brush. But these bigger brushes, like I think it's a number 4 angled tip brush, can hold more paint, and so to me they do a nicer line. So I use that with the green paint mixed with a little black to do this line. You don't have to have this in the painting, but I just thought it added a little interest to it. And for the dots in the center, you're going to do yellow mixed with white or yellow mixed with a little green and white. You want them to be pretty light. You can't use the yellow on its own because it's very transparent if you don't add some white to make it opaque. And when I add those, I like to use the wooden end of the paintbrush rather than the bristled end. And I just dip that into the paint and just make the dots with that wooden end of the brush. That seems to work better for me. And you might, if you want to, like here I'm impatient to wait since I'm doing a video. So I used white first to make my dots. Just straight white, because that way I will definitely know that the next coat that I put on, the yellow or the yellowish green, it's going to really show up because it has white underneath it. So if you're patient enough, you can do the white first, let that dry, and then put the green on top of that, and it will be certain to show up well. I hope you enjoyed painting with me today. If you did, if you could press the like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and go to sociableart.com to look at the paint kits and see if you'd like to purchase one to paint along. Thank you.